Welcome back, folks. Tom and I are going to talk about microsites today. A website within a website. I think Tom, I think they go by other names as well. What else would somebody call these?
Well, I think we really don't know yet. Everyone calls them something different. We've heard terms like mini sites or sub-sites or microsites or website within a website is what we came up with. But it's basically the idea that you have your main company site, but that within that website, your target markets may be so different that you have to have sub-sites underneath for the various market segments. And we're seeing this more and more with clients because the website users are wanting more specific information. And let me give you an example of this. If you're shopping for a product from a company that has headphones and speakers, and you want headphones, you're going to want to see the headphones. You don't want to constantly see the speakers showing up or accessories showing up or speaker stands showing up. You just want to see headphones. So it's the concept of better meeting user needs by having subcategories within your website. And it goes beyond just standard navigation because these sub-websites have to be all-inclusive of that particular segment.
How would that be notated? I mean, if we were saying like if we have somebody's going online, how would they know if they're in a microsite or something to that effect? Like if we use your example, and let's go to Bose. We'll use Bose as an example. So you have Bose speakers or you have Bose headphones. Obviously, sometimes there's some crossover, but usually if you're going to go get one of their Bose Wave speakers, you're going to go and get that. If you want the noise canceling headphones, you're going to be for that. How would that be explained? How could you explain it to somebody who goes, I have no idea what a microsite? That might be speakers.bose.com or headphones.bose.com. Would that be something that would be considered a microsite?
Well, let's start with the users first because the users won't care that it's a microsite or not. And for the most part, users won't care even what the domain name is because they just want to get their headphones or find whatever they want to find. But for the person that's managing the website or running the website business, it's best to have the main domain name of the company /subsite. And the reason that that's important now is because that's what Google wants to see. Google really is looking at the power of your domain. It's for your website. So if you have a website and you're Bose, for example, you'll want to do bose.com/speakers/ microphones / headphones, whatever it might be. But that's the best way to do it is with the / and not so much with the dot. Which is the kind of question we get asked. Should we buy a new domain? Should we use a dot there and have a new domain that way? Well, Google's basically saying, no, keep it all under one master website, and we will index your pages by search. In fact, if you do Google searches now, and we see this especially with new websites that we launch, Google is really indexing all the pages of the site, and they're starting to display more randomly on searches. So you don't just see the home page show up. And so we have clients come to us and say, well, why isn't Google displaying our home page? Well, Google thinks that this page is more appropriate to the search. So if you're the user, when you land on that page, you are basically, we want you to see the sub-site. We want you to see the navigation and everything that's appropriate for that market segment. And that's just kind of how things are rolling up. Now, there may be a time for you to develop a separate website, but that generally comes when users are so confused that they can't tell the difference between the company and the products, or the user is upset or disappointed in seeing that part of your site, right? For example, an example of that might be that if you're selling wholesale products and consumers are landing on your page hoping to buy your wonderful products, but they have to buy them in mass quantities, well, you need a retail site. You need to separate your sites at that point because you can't use your wholesale site for the consumer. So there will be times when you have to get a new domain name and physically separate the sites, but for the most part, most companies will have to start thinking of their site as more than just a website, but really a web property that then is divided into a whole bunch of microsites. And I want you to ponder this thought for a second. Facebook.com is one website. It's one website. with a billion subsites or microsites for all the different users out there. So Facebook dominates and owns the web for social media because of that fact. Imagine if every single Facebook site that was developed was, TomYoungFacebook.com or whatever, or,
Right.
Glenn Thayer Facebook.com. Then you'd have a very different approach to the brand that is Facebook. And
So,
so
I guess
that's kind of the philosophy behind all this.
Well, the big question is here's something else that comes up. When do you have a new domain? When do you launch something new? Do you launch a new website? Let's talk about domain names for a quick second on this, because a lot of businesses do own several domains. It may not just be one domain that they look at. If we look at Bose, that might be a prime example. You look at Bose. Okay, you have speakers and you have headphones. Two different microsites or two different websites within a website. Well, what if they own Bose speakers, or their website might be QC20i, which is one of their products. It's like, if they own that, well, what do you do with that if you own all of those? Do you go in and go to your domain registrar and forward that, and just do a domain forward?
Yes, well, you want to think about it from the standpoint of the user. So if a user is going to put that domain name in, then you want it to either redirect or go to a very specific landing page that will take you to the main site or the main subsite or section of your website. But the idea of having domain names for Google and for search, you want to get away from that, because Google doesn't want you to do that. So you would really just think about the user.
Google doesn't care anymore than if you own a domain that's appropriate for your subsite. Is it appropriate to do it forwarding? Does Google care anymore? I mean, does it even matter anymore?
No, Google doesn't care about forwarded domains, and it has no impact on search. We see this all the time. We work with clients that could not get the domain they wanted, so they put a hyphen in their domain, right? And they got their company name with a hyphen in it. Well, no one knows their name or their company with a hyphen in it, and none of their business cards or anything like that has the hyphen in it. And so what we recommend that you do is get the domain without the hyphen. And if you have to, you might pay more for it. So we had a client recently where we did that, but they have about 5 to 10 years of history of having a domain name with a hyphen. And so we said, well, we're not going to change your current domain. We're just going to redirect the actual domain without the hyphen, so if anyone puts it in, and they will, because that's how most companies have their domain names, it'll be redirected to you. Now, eventually, over time, they can make a change in their site and use that new domain, but there may be consequences, because Google may penalize them and they may lose search traffic and rankings. So Google, it is a fact that if you have been on the internet a long time, you're going to get better search results than people that are just coming on. And that comes back to this concept of the power of your domain and the power of your domain in Google. And it's really scary to play with that. And in fact, it helps you and gives you better visibility if you continue to grow on the current domain and just redirect to it.
So even if you owned something that might be, let's say you owned the search term, the one-word search term. Like if you sold, I'll give you an example, boxes. You sell cardboard boxes, and you own boxes.com. Is that something that's going, and you say, okay, I own this, I haven't done anything with it. I've owned, movingboxesgalore.com was the name of my company, but I was able to come by and get boxes.com. If I start using boxes.com, will Google then start looking at it because the domain name is the actual search term? Would you get any bonus points from Google there?
It depends. If you're not going to get any bonus points from Google, you have to start from scratch. So if you have a website right now and you're selling boxes and you have great positioning, lots of pages, and a nice foothold in Google, if you switch everything over to boxes.com, you are starting from scratch to get your rankings up. Now, it may happen pretty quick because boxes.com would be a great domain, but the better thing to do would be to redirect people that go to boxes.com to your website and keep and maintain the current brand that you have. But once again, it just depends on how many pages you have and the longevity of that. What's more likely to happen is somebody might have the domain boxesforsale.com with hyphens in it, and finally buy the domain boxesforsale.com without hyphens, well, if they get that domain, it's still better to do a redirect than to start over. And that's why these microsites are so important, because Google is going to reward websites with more pages and more content that is more specific to the unique searches that are done. So if your website can get indexed in Google by all these different segments, then you're going to get more traffic and you're going to have happier users. And it's important to see a subsite really as its own website. And you could have internal navigation just for that subsite. You could have a blog that's built just for that subsite, images, graphics, videos, and so forth. But what you don't want to do is have your subsite have such a different look, branding-wise, that people disassociate it from your company. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're a construction company and you do commercial construction and you build buildings, right? Well, commercial contractors usually do a lot more than that. They usually do building services, even custodian work, and so stuff like that. All of those could be subsites within your main site, but take advantage of the power of your brand. And that's one way to make subsites real effective.
Now, is there any are there any ways to do this appropriately, or any best practices when looking at it in your overall content marketing strategy?
Well, I think for content marketing, you have to think about this as a separate site, which, like I said, would include having your own blog, having lots of content on the services that are specific to that site or that microsite, and then also having a resource section just for that market segment. All of those things are important. And I think that once again, as we talked about in this podcast, it also has to be strategically in line with the rest of your site. One of the things you want to be careful of is that you put a lot of effort into one microsite within your site, and then that site looks so much better than the other pages on your website that it doesn't pass muster. So you've got to keep the strategy consistent throughout all of your market segments.
Okay. Well, what would be the key action items for all of our viewers and listeners today?
Well, the first thing is to really identify where you would need microsites, and to do that, you really need to segment your market and segment your services. What I'm asking people to do, and what we're recommending people do, is that you take your services and products navigation and expand that, so within each of those sections you have microsites that really meet user needs. To do that, you want to make sure your strategy's in the right place, and you want to have a sitemap for all of these different websites. And there is definitely value in having consistency across all of your subsites with your navigation. So users can then also get a very good understanding of your company in general, and when they navigate to subsites, they see consistent navigation. That's good for the brand as well. Brand it off of your main domain name, as we discussed. Look at your keyword results and your keyword research when doing the setup of the navigation, the URLs, and the title tags. That's going to be critical. And then get some feedback from your target market on what they would want to see in a microsite, because this is a highly engaged user that's considering purchasing from you. And then finally, you can track microsites real effectively in Google Analytics if you make sure that there's a keyword in the URL, because then you can just search in Google Analytics under that keyword, and it'll show you all the activity of your microsites. So it's a very effective strategy, meets user needs, and really highly promotes your company. It just takes more work and time to get it right, but if you do, you should see some nice results.
Okay, well, wonderful. Thanks so much, Tom, and thank all of you for joining us today for the Intuitive Websites Internet Marketing Podcast.